Health tourism, it's an issue that makes me very angry. Do you know why? Because it's called the National Health Service, not the International Health Service, and we, frankly, have been taken for mugs for year after year after year. What does health tourism cost us? An estimated 1 to 2 billion sterling every single year. Now, I tried to make an issue of this back in the 2015 general election. Have a listen to this. I'll then tell you what the reaction to it was. I mentioned health tourism. OK, here's a fact. And I'm sure the other people will be mortified that I dare to talk about it. There are 7,000 diagnoses in this country every year for people who are HIV positive, which is not a good place for any of them to be, I know. But 60% of them are not British nationals. You can come into Britain from anywhere in the world and get diagnosed with HIV and get the retroviral drugs that cost up to £25,000 per year per patient. I know there are some horrible things happening in many parts of the world, but what we need to do is to put the National Health Service there for British people and families who in many cases have paid into this system for decades. Now, I said that in the Leaders' Debate back in 2015. I was on the panel with David Cameron, Nick Clegg, David Miliband and others. And I mean, you would have thought, to look at Miliband's face particularly, you would have thought that I was sort of King Herod, that I'd advocated killing the firstborn. And of course, the headlines were that what I'd done was a total disgrace, a complete embarrassment. It was awful. What was interesting about it was as the weeks and months went by, I started to get letters sent to me by people who were HIV sufferers saying, actually, our ability to access the care we need has been diminished hugely since we sent out this message that people can come here from all over the world, get this test and get the anti-retroviral drugs. So I've tried for years to make this a big issue that we could talk about. And it seems perhaps we are at last getting somewhere because NHS bosses have launched a crackdown on health tourism. They're going to have crack squads going into hospitals and looking at people who come predominantly from outside the European Union. So if you fly in on a plane, give birth in an NHS hospital, we're going to give you a bill for £7,000. If you come in and get some form of heart surgery, we're going to give you a bill for £16,000. If you get standard oncology cancer treatment, you're going to get a bill for £15,000. Is this the right approach? Is the right approach to go into hospitals and issue people who are having treatment with bills? Or does that mean that we frankly wouldn't be the kind of civilised country that we pride ourselves on being? Does this issue of health tourism make your blood boil? Now, within the European Union, in theory, there isn't a problem, because we all get treatment in each other's countries and then everybody settles up. The problem is we settle up our bills with the rest of Europe. Many of the other European countries appear to be deeply reluctant to settle up their bills with us. So this does operate both inside and outside the European Union. And yeah, do you know something? Looking back on it now, 3 years on, I don't regret for one moment pointing out that 60% of the patients we're treating in this country for HIV come from overseas. Maybe you agree with me. Maybe you think it's beyond the pale. Either way, surely, this is a problem that somehow we have to deal with. Nigel, we may be a civilised country, but we have a National Health Service, not an international one. So yes, people should pay who come in from abroad. There is another way of doing this, of course. One is to send in crack squads and hit squads. The other would be to make sure that people who travel to this country have the relevant health insurance with them. Quite difficult to get into America unless you've got some valid form of health insurance. So maybe that's a way that you do it. Or does that just make border checks, border controls more cumbersome and more difficult? Or could the whole thing be done online? And I'm particularly keen this morning, I want to hear from anybody that works within the National Health Service. And, you don't have to give your real name if you are worried about some sort of, bosses clamping down upon you. But how much of a problem, if you're working in the NHS, how much of a problem is it that we're giving care to people from overseas and we frankly haven't got enough resources to go round for British people? And I think this is a big issue. I'm surprised, to be honest with you, that the other political parties have not picked this up and been stronger with it. But for some reason, it seems to be, it's one of those subjects almost that it's too difficult for anybody to touch. And of course, in my case, using HIV as the example, with 60% coming from overseas, people hated it. But I think I was right then, and I think I'm right now. The question is, how do we actually do it? Julie is calling from Coventry. Good morning, Julie.
Hello, Nigel. Nice to speak to you.
Good to speak to you. So what's your experience of this, Julie?
Well, up until recently, about a year ago, I worked in a doctor's surgery. We used to get a terrific amount. We're in the Midlands, so
Yep.
a terrific amount of registrations at our surgery. And even though the passports of the people, we used to always have to take the passports for registration, used to say not eligible for NHS funding. So we used to query that. In the end, we tried what was then the PCT. We phoned them, contacted them to say, look, the passports are saying not eligible for NHS funding. The PCT at the time said, yes, it's still okay to register them. So there was hardly anybody at all that was not registered at our surgery.
So pretty much anybody, Julie, pretty much anybody could walk into your surgery. You wouldn't know whether they were, you wouldn't know, of course, whether they were in the country legally or not, would you?
No, as long as they came in, we used to take ID, so one of the things would be a passport, which clearly said not eligible for NHS funding, and yet we would still be able to register them.
And they would all have address, and they would all give you an address where they were living, yeah?
But usually a couple of pieces of ID. It was very iffy because sometimes, in fact, I used to write onto the notes as I went into the doctors. Personally, myself, I used to nearly always ask for dates of birth, which they were expecting people to ask the names. It was easy to find them on the register if you asked the dates of birth, and quite often they'd give a different date of birth. So you kind of assumed they probably weren't who they even said they were. They were coming under somebody else's ID.
And so, Julie,
but of course, at that stage,
not eligible.
Once they were registered,
not eligible for treatment, and yet you were. But you were registering them anyway, and that presumably means
we were told to.
Yeah, and you were treating them as well.
Yes. Yes.
And how did that make you feel, Julie?
Cross, very cross. You knew the system was being abused, but when the PCT, which was PCT then, was telling you still do it, at what point the receptionists were gobsmacked, and presumably the doctors too.
So is it time, Julie? Is it time we got a bit tougher?
Oh, I think it's time we got very much tougher.
Yeah, OK. Listen, Judy, thank you. And that's a very, very useful call. There's somebody there who's been working within the National Health Service, and they're told from upon high, just register them, just treat them. This is not what the NHS was set up to do. It's not what people in this country pay their taxes for. That's what I think. Annabelle is calling from Hull. Good morning, Annabelle.
Morning, Nigel. You all right?
Yes, I am. But I just wish we'd really get to grips with this, Annabelle.
Now, you see, if you came back, then it might be a bit better.
Well, you just listened to a clip, Annabelle, of me up against our great political leaders in 2015, and all I got for it was abuse.
Yes, it's because it's bored. The big R word comes up. However, the reason I'm cross about it, because I have a very, very close family member who works for the NHS within the department that actually attempts to reclaim the money.
Right.
And I think what he said is 0.0004 of anything is ever claimed, because usually they abscond, leave the country, and it's never, they won't get it, they won't pay it back. So, and this reciprocal agreement that the EU has, you should see the amount of medicine that finds its way back to Poland.
It's not being honoured, is it?
No.
As you say, in theory, with the European Union, there isn't a problem because of reciprocity, but it doesn't actually work, and we are big-time losers on that. But I mean, Annabelle, tell me, what should we do? I mean, for people coming in who we can be pretty sure are not going to pay their bills, even if your son chases them, do we just refuse treatment?
Difficult question if it was your son laying on the floor in America.
Well, but this is the point, isn't it?
Yeah, but I would have to have insurance.
Yeah.
This is what I don't get. Why do we pay holiday insurance to go to Europe? If I want to go in Spain for a week, I have to take out holiday insurance, but it's in the EU, so I don't get it. If a Spaniard comes here, they don't pay holiday insurance or any insurance. So maybe I agree with the former lady, saying about some form of ID on their entry document. That would help, but like she says, they probably come under a different name, as they often do.
We're still a long way from solving it. Annabelle from Hull, thank you. And those last two calls, that is very interesting. That's the measure of it. People working within the NHS, deeply frustrated about what they're being asked to do. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively here on LBC, and it's now 11:15. Health tourism is a tough issue. Most people, when pressed, would agree that actually we shouldn't be losing 1 to 2 billion sterling every year on health tourism. Where it gets tricky is when you ask the question, what to do about it? What if somebody is sitting in a doctor's surgery and they may well have fake ID, but if they need very important, urgent medical treatment, do we, as other parts of the world would do to us, say, can we have your credit card, please? But if they can't produce it, do we just sort of chuck them out onto the street, or do we treat them? We are a civilised country, we are a caring country, but I think we feel that we're being taken for mugs. I haven't yet found absolutely the answer. I think insurance, travel insurance, must be a big part of it. Sarah on Facebook says, yes, it's absolutely the right approach. If there was plenty of money to go around, I'd say let's treat everyone. However, we know what the state of affairs is. Tina says, you get the money. Charge before treatment. It's the only way. Nowhere else would you get free healthcare. Well, in general terms, Tina, that is true. I would guess there is a difference, is there not, between absolutely urgent treatment, a car crash or whatever it may be, and somebody who perhaps needs elective surgery. Keith is calling from Stoke Newington. Good morning, Keith.
Morning, Nigel. Yes, I think in the case of HIV, it's a very special case, a different case, and I think the nation should contribute to a pool of money so it is treated, whichever country it affects, because if it doesn't, it's going to be so damaging and devastating to everybody.
But Keith, just before you move on, my argument was, and they're 2015 figures, I don't have the updates, but if 60% of all of our resource in this country that's going into HIV is being used for overseas patients, that leaves less for our people, doesn't it?
Oh, I totally and utterly agree with you, Nigel. I'm just saying that there should be an international pool of money which each country contributes to address that. It shouldn't be just down to England to treat everybody with HIV.
No, quite. No, absolutely. No, fine. We're at one on that. Okay, and more generally, Keith, I mean, what do you do? You've got somebody, they may be in the country legally, they may be in the country illegally, but somebody who needs medical treatment. Would you, Keith from Stoke Newington, demand that they give their credit card first?
Well, unfortunately, it all comes to economics, because we don't sort out the economics. We're all going to go broke, which is the trouble with the EU. I agree with you that they do have to have some form of payment. And I think one of your last callers was a very good idea about they have to have an insurance policy to cover them. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah,
absolutely brilliant.
No, I think that is ultimately the right solution, Keith. I thank you for your call. Dave says, if anybody's flown here without having insurance, the airline should be billed. That would solve the problem. It would certainly help, wouldn't it? And already, of course, ferry companies and Eurostar are desperate not to be used as conduits for illegal immigration, because they get fined a couple of £1,000s a person, which, of course, is why we've got people sneaking onto lorries at Dunkirk and Calais and elsewhere. Nigel, you need to tell your listeners, people from outside the EU pay an NHS surcharge on their visas. You should ask the government what they do with that money. Michael, interesting point, but it's a tiny surcharge. But of course, the problem is, you could argue, Michael, that money doesn't go from one tax source directly towards an outcome. It all just goes into the middle. And, of course, there are plenty of people coming to this country who don't need visas anyway. Nigel, immigrants with HIV has deluged Europe, up to 70%, putting strain, depleting funds. But it's not a subject that you can touch. Yeah, well, I did touch it, and goodness me, as I said, you'd have thought I was King Herod. Use existing identity cards, national insurance cards, just add a photo to the card. and show it when you go for treatment. I have always been against identity cards. I've always been against the idea that I should be stopped walking down Bromley High Street and asked to produce my papers. But I have to say, over the course of the last couple of months, I'm beginning to think on issues like this, there may be no other solution. But if I have to have an ID card before I get, that I have to carry at all times and show before I get treatment, can I first have some absolute assurance that people who haven't got UK ID cards or relevant insurance won't get treated? Otherwise, why should I bother? Let's ask Jackie in Eltham what she makes of this. Hi.
Hello, Nigel. I know your mum, Barbara.
Okay, anyway, very good.
Yeah. I worked for the health service for 23 years, Nigel, so I saw it and wore the T-shirt. Whenever I go out for even a day trip out, they ask for insurance in England, yeah?
Yep.
We go up to Norfolk. So, have you got insurance? Luckily, we go to Australia a lot, so we have a yearly insurance. Otherwise, it's quite expensive. But people can afford to come to England. They've got to come with insurance. When we go to Australia, we've got to have insurance because they certainly wouldn't treat us. One of my daughters was very ill in Australia. We had to ring the insurance company to see if they'd even treat her. So please, we have to say, if you come to England, you need travel insurance. It's as simple as that, Nigel.
Yes, even if you emigrate, Jackie, to Australia, for the first few years, you can't get automatic healthcare there, can you?
Put a big bond. I know.
So you think insurance is probably the answer, yeah?
I think so. I think it's fundamental. We go all over the world. We go to England, and they'd like us to have it, but as I say, we've got a yearly one, Nigel, so... But lots of people, I say, well, hang on, we've got a health service here.
Yeah.
Oh, well, if you died up north or somewhere, it cost you a lot of money, and thank you very much for that tip. But anyway, Nigel, yes, health insurance, we must make it very clear now that people do not come to this country without health insurance. They can afford the fare, they can afford the insurance.
Jackie, just sort of give you a scenario, and a moral dilemma, if I can, on this Sunday morning. Let's say that somebody who illegally has snuggled into this country or has overstayed their visa. I mean, they're the two chief ways that the illegal migrant population is made up. So you've got an illegal immigrant in this country with a serious health condition. Do you treat him or her, or do you just say no?
Well, in the health service, they'd go to casualty, they'd be rushed to casualty, they'd be seen before anyone would even ask, Nigel. This is the trouble. Having worked in the health system 23 years, I could write a book, and there's certain things I'd like to tell you, but I'm not allowed to, about what went on. It's unbelievable.
But there are moral issues here, Jackie, aren't there? I mean, I mean, the idea that we'd leave someone to die on the pavement rather than treat them at A&E, it's not kind of our way, is it?
No, but that's what happened in America. We had to ring through to get permission for them to take my daughter in.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. I think people take advantage. I think it's a lot of health tourism. I know that. And certain ladies used to come from another part of Ireland for treatment. I go up in the morning, get the money, and they're gone.
And they're having a referendum on that now, aren't they? And it's happening in Ireland. In fact, it'll be next weekend. Jackie, thanks for the call. And Jackie, thinks we've got to be tougher, got to be a bit more like America. Otherwise, people will go on taking advantage. What about the number of women from overseas who travel here as visitors but are pregnant and stay long enough to have the baby delivered here? Suggest you inquire as to how many foreigners, mainly EU, are treated in this manner. And Ian talks about Swindon Maternity Hospital, etc. Yeah, look, Ian, it is scandalous, and it's not just from European countries. We've seen the same from African countries and elsewhere. I suppose in one way it's flattering that people think we've got good healthcare in this country, but we are being taken for a ride. We've got to get tougher. But it's not easy because it poses big moral dilemmas. And, I understand Jackie's point. Well, if you haven't got a credit card, you die on the pavement outside. That may happen in many other parts of the world. I just don't see us being able to enforce that. So insurance seems to me to be the best way forward. Gregory is calling from Croydon. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel.
So...
Right, sir. I've got a couple of points that you could hear. First of all, my son was born at Croydon Mayday Hospital.
Yep.
And my wife paid for him. She's Japanese.
Okay.
Now, last year, she lives in Ireland with my son. Last year, somebody broke his arm, and I got a bill for it. At no stage did a doctor or nurse ask me for the fee. Straight away, at reception, they presented me with a bill.
And this was in Ireland?
This was in Ireland, yeah.
Really?
Yes, because I've got a home in Ireland. I stay here or work in the UK and send money
Right.
back there to my wife and son.
Yep. So you got a bill for that. And your wife, when she was given a bill for the birth of your son, she actually paid the bill, did she?
Yeah, we paid
Goodness
it.
me, how very strange. Because it seems that no one actually pays these bills.
No, what was so strange is that it was the midwife that come up with a credit card. Now, as I say, in Ireland,
Yep.
it's not the medical staff that deal with it, it's the administration staff, which is what it should be. If you get the administration staff to do it, they're sitting there moving paper about, they can do that.
All right,
It's
so
simple enough.
you see it as all being quite straightforward then, Gregory, really?
I see it straightforward in that way. Now, if you get people like you've just described who come here illegal immigrants,
Yeah.
just to bill the government from where they're from.
Yes, but then you have to get them to actually pay, don't you?
Well, you can put it on their bill.
Or
And,
we could deduct it from the foreign aid budget, couldn't we?
Well, yeah, you could do that. Yeah, there you go.
Or from EU contributions.
Yep, exactly.
You know, if Poland aren't paying the money
we
and
need solutions.
maybe we're not giving the invoice quickly enough. I mean, we could be a bit at fault here. But yeah, no, there are things that we could do, Gregory. Do you sense that this issue that is costing us £1 to £2 billion a year is something that makes people angry?
It makes me angry. I can assure you that, especially when
That's why you picked up the phone, isn't it?
when I went to Ireland and they presented it to me, I understood. I thought, fair enough. I'm not the thing, you know.
Yep.
I haven't got the paperwork. Fine, I paid it. It was 180 euros. Right. Now, if we do that, we might actually be able to afford the other things.
Well, that's the point, Gregory. Gregory, I thank you for your call on this Sunday morning. Nigel, it's about time we charged the health tourist. My dentist will not look in my mouth unless I have paid and signed the form. So why does not the receptionist ask for proof before you recede, says John from Eltham. We've had a caller from Eltham too this morning. What is it with LBC and Eltham? I don't know. Yeah, John, that's all well and good, but we had an NHS receptionist from the Midlands who was our first caller today who said she was told from upon high, even though they're not eligible for health treatment, put them on the register and treat them. That is the culture we've had in this country. Anything to do with immigration or people from overseas, everyone's scared to mention because otherwise they fear they're going to get screamed at. I tried to break that in 2015 and goodness me, what good it did me. Or maybe it did. Maybe. If NH bosses are now launching a big crackdown on health tourism, maybe we're beginning, at last, to get somewhere. You're listening to a Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. It's now 11:30. Well, we all want to get tough on health tourism. It just gets more tricky when you start to find out exactly how do we do it. Insurance, yes, but what happens if people present themselves for treatment and they're in a serious condition? Are we the kind of country that turns them away? Seems that happens around much of the rest of the world. Jan says, I've lived and worked overseas, and for a serious operation for my brother-in-law, his wife had to find $20,000 before a doctor would even look at him. Peter says, a friend of mine's son fell from a balcony in Bulgaria. When my friend arrived at the hospital, his son was laid outside. The hospital had put him there until he had proof of insurance 4 years ago. Reciprocity, ? Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that this is happening in France and elsewhere, that rather than trusting on the system where governments pay each other, it seems health services in other countries want to get the cash a bit more quickly. I guess who can blame them? I was taken seriously ill twice, once in France and once in Austria. In both cases, I received first-class treatment, but in recovery, I was asked how I was going to pay. Luckily, I had good medical insurance. We should insist on the same. People would just abscond if presented with a bill, says Richard in Cheltenham. Tony is calling from Harlow. Good morning, Tony.
What's it, Nigel? Yeah, we've got the biggest tourist thing, one of the biggest tourists in the world come here, you know, all the tourists, they come here. But what they say, where can we go next year? I know, let's go to England, you don't have to pay any medical insurance. So that's an extra couple of drinks for us to buy. I mean, I've been paying, I left school at 14,
Yep.
I'm 70, I've been paying every month into the National Health,
Yep.
and I've paid into that hundreds of times over for whatever I want.
Yep.
And I was in Mason's Hill Hospital years ago, you know, in Bromley.
I was there for 4 months once. Yeah, go on. Yep.
Yeah, and there was there was an American GI there. He was getting seen to, and he had accident emergency. They patched him up. He came out. I watched him. He went to the counter, to the receptionist, pulled his wallet out, and said, "How much do I owe you?" She said, "Nothing." He looked up in the air. He probably thought, "I think I moved there."
Yeah. That's our culture. But, Tony, you've paid all this national insurance. But don't you feel better about yourself as a human being, knowing that your taxpayers' money is being used for people from all over the world?
Yeah. Of course I do. I love it. You know what I'm saying? I'm sitting here with my cigar. I love it.
Tony, I think, there is... at the end of that clip that we played of me back in the election of 15, I said at the end that families have been paying into this for decades, and the idea that you can just waltz into this country, have a baby and then leave, it's outrageous, isn't it?
Yes, and also you've predicted so many things that have come true.
Well, I've done my best, Tony. I've done my best, matey. I've done my best.
No, you have. You predicted so many things that have happened. It's not mentioned much, so I'm mentioning it.
Well, thank you. Tony, you're a star. Have a great Sunday. And Chris, rather backing up what Tony said about the American GI in Bromley General Hospital, Chris from Wiltshire says, "I dislocated my shoulder in France last year. I had both an EU Health Service green card and full health insurance. But even so, the hospital wouldn't consider doing anything until I went to the cash point and drew the money to pay in full. After that, the treatment was carried out. I then had to try and recover the money on returning to the UK. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? It clearly, across Europe, there are people taking a much more direct response. I've been in A&E when two separate people have offered to pay. This is like the American GI. They've offered to pay and told by the receptionist that the treatment was free. You see, there we are. That's the culture. The National Health Service, free at the point of use. Yes, but not for the entire world, I think, is the message. Debbie says, if people around the world like our system, why do they not try to emulate it for their own nations? Well, because they don't want to be taken for a ride, I guess, Debbie. And Sandra says, my sister-in-law is Thai, and she had to pay for her thyroid operation here in Bristol. So why not charge everybody else? It's the right way, seeing as we have to pay if we go to another country. Sandra, I think there is huge general agreement on that. It's just how tough do we get? And, we've got this report overnight. It's here in the Mail on Sunday, and they've been campaigning on this issue and basically saying that there are going to be these crack squads going into hospitals and demanding that people pay. Difficult, I suppose, to ask nurses and doctors to get credit cards out of people because they are the caring professions. I'm going to ask Avi in Cheam what his view is. Good morning.
Hi, good morning, Nigel. Nigel, I'm somebody who have traveled to this country on business visa, I would say, for 10 years, and now I'm here resident for last 8 years.
Uh-huh.
So over my experience of last 18 years, in the first 10 years as well, whenever I was entering here, I always had my insurance with me. So I'm not able to appreciate if somebody is legally here, then they should have some paperwork by virtue of which, anyways, they should be able to pay for their medical expenses. Why should this be even an issue at all?
Did anybody, Avi, ever check whether you had insurance when you were coming through passport control?
Yeah, I would say without my insurance, I wouldn't even get my visa.
Okay.
Without visa, business visa, I was certainly on expenses. My organization would have put in the bill. Nonetheless, I always had those papers. And I'm saying it works same in Japan, Singapore, Netherlands. These are the countries where I've lived for, say, more than 6 months. And I have been there on business visa, business purposes as well.
And now you're a resident here. You're living here.
8 years, paying taxes here.
Paying taxes.
Yeah. But
so how do you feel? Let me ask you, as a UK taxpayer, how would you deal with the dilemma of somebody, and bear in mind, there's at least 1 million illegal immigrants in this country, but it's probably much nearer 2 or maybe more than that. How do we deal with illegal immigrants that are in this country that are expecting free healthcare? What would you do?
I would say, with any illegal immigrant, you will do whatever law requires you to do. But having said that, if they are in hospital and if they're not able to provide, so whichever agency is responsible for them should be taking care of them. As simple as that, isn't it?
Well, it should be, but it's not, is it? Because, it does present, or it can present, some quite big moral dilemmas. But look, the way you were doing it, clearly was absolutely above board. You make the point about a visa. I wonder whether sometimes, frankly, we're not doing our checks properly. Avi, I thank you very much indeed. And it's your tax, Avi, as much as it is anybody's. Thank you for the call. If countries do not pay their medical bills, then we should ban entry to their citizens until they do, says Jane. Jane, that's the sort of thing President Trump would say, and the world would go absolutely bonkers if he did so. I'm going to go to Finley in Sevenoaks. Good morning.
Oh, good morning, Nigel. Thanks for having me.
Not a bit.
Seven or 8 years ago, at the age of 65, I had a very bad skiing accident in Canada. I was fully insured. I was taken by ambulance off the slopes. I'd badly smashed my collarbone.
Yeah.
And when I got to the hospital, I was put on a stretcher type thing, and I was asked to pay up front before they would see me. I said I'd got insurance. You were talking of insurance.
Yes.
They absolutely didn't want to know the insurance, didn't want to know anything. They wouldn't entertain me, bearing in mind my age and the pain I was in. They did not want to know. I had to get an ambulance back to where I was staying, and I had to come home from Canada early. I had to disguise it on the aeroplane because I wouldn't have been allowed on the aeroplane.
Gosh, you really went through it, Finley.
Oh my God, it was dreadful. But they had absolutely no sympathy at all.
So let's just
accept my insurance.
Let's just get this right. So you're lying on a stretcher.
Yeah.
In pain.
In the hospital.
In Canada.
For the money up front, I didn't have. I didn't have the money to. They asked for $1,000 straight up front for the bed for the night, I wasn't really. I was a bit belligerent. I wasn't willing to pay this because I was fully comprehensive insurance. Didn't want to know.
No, well, they know how difficult.
Within days of getting back, I got a bill for the ambulances, which of course I paid for.
But they probably know, Finley, that insurance companies can be notoriously tough to deal with, and they weren't taking any chances at all. Finley, you've been through the tough end of health tourism, right? Where you were treated as a suspect who probably wouldn't pay unless they got the assurance up front. Do you think our approach in this country, and we've had, people on this morning who, working for GP surgeries, told just to register and treat people who weren't eligible in this country. Which system is better? The Canadian system that you suffered under, or the British system, which appears to be a bit of a free-for-all?
Well, I think our system's the best in the world, regardless. I know there's a lot wrong with it, but there's an awful lot right with it.
Yeah, I think that. Finley, do you know what? I've been in emergency twice in my life, and if you're in real trouble, I think our health system is brilliant. Whether it's quite so good at diagnostics and other things is perhaps a different question. Finley from Sevenoaks, thank you for your call and your story. That's the tough end of town, isn't it? You're lying on a stretcher in agony, been smashed up in a skiing accident, you've got health insurance, but unless you give the Canadian hospital your credit card, you're not going to get treated. It's a hell of a contrast to hear. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It is now 11:45. Well, it's a huge issue, health tourism, and we're getting, stories of people around other parts of the world. Even though they've got the right insurance, the hospitals won't treat them unless they produce a credit card. We seem to be the other way. Hit squads to reclaim NHS money. I'll believe it when I see it. I won't hold my breath. It's just the usual lip service from the government. Oh, don't depress me. I was hoping things might be moving on a little bit. You're probably right. Darren is calling from Birmingham. Good morning, Darren.
Morning, Nigel. I'm a bit confused about the way that the NHS is dealing with this. My wife's Filipino, and she came over on a UK spouse visa last year, for which we had to pay a quite significant amount plus the health surcharge. She was actually pregnant at the time, and when she went for the first checkup at the hospital, before they would commence any treatment, I had to supply copies of the visa and also copies of the receipt for the payment of the NHS surcharge. So I think that we've got it right, but I just think that the government and the NHS itself are notoriously bad at implementing the rules that are in place.
Yes, I mean, Darren, you've done it legally and properly, and that is how the system ought to work, and clearly in your case, it has worked. And yet, from just down the road in Coventry, we had a lady on earlier who was a receptionist who said she was just told, even though their passports say they're ineligible, just sign them up and treat them. So there's something very inconsistent here, Darren, isn't there?
Well, exactly. I agree, and this is where I'm saying that I don't think it's that we've got it wrong. I just think that we don't implement it correctly.
Yes.
And,
yes.
This is. And this is the reason why it's so inefficient,
Yeah, and why don't we get our money back from the other European Union states?
Well, exactly. I mean, I don't know what we could do about that, but, like you say, we're good at paying our bills, but they're not. But they're basically not so good at paying their bills. But the question you asked earlier about should we ever I would hate to live in a country where you had that guy that had the skiing accident in Canada.
Yes.
I would hate to live in a country where we would leave somebody standing there in pain.
Well, he was an old age pensioner on a stretcher, smashed up. He thought he'd done all the right things by having the necessary health insurance, and yet he had to produce. And that's Canada, Darren, which is a pretty liberal country in many ways.
Yeah, but I wouldn't want to see us go as far as that.
So you think morally, better to be a bit weak on this than be too tough on this, yeah?
Yeah, yes, I think so. Especially when it comes to emergency treatment. Obviously, longer term treatment. Yes, they should be looking at, but we should never turn anybody away just because they may not have been born here.
But Darren, do you understand the anger that I'm getting from callers and texters and tweeters this morning on this?
Well, I do, but I do think that some of it is from people that they read the headlines, but they don't actually have the experience or know that the procedures and the policies are there in place. It's just the fact that the government is notoriously poor at implementing them. Yeah. And yet, like I say, as soon as we went to the first appointment, we had to prove that she was eligible for treatment.
So the system can work, Darren. That's what your phone call tells me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Andy on Facebook says, this is why the Conservatives are allowing this to happen. They want to run the NHS into the ground and sell it off on the cheap. This is all preparing us for privatisation. What utter tosh, Andy, really. It was the Blair government that did more privatisation of the National Health Service than anything that's been done by the Conservatives. Right. Now, a suggestion here from Mandy in Abbeymead in Gloucestershire that we should have an ID card for fags, booze, gambling, medication or the purchase of sharp objects. We must have, without travel insurance, no treatment. Tough, says Mandy. You can lie on the stretcher, like Finlay from Sevenoaks. But Darren says we're just not that kind of country. Ultimately, Darren is right. We are not that kind of country, but we are being taken for a ride. I am convinced of it. I think it's crazy. Robbie is calling from Edenbridge. Hello, Robbie.
Morning, Nigel. Nice to talk to you. First, thank you for dragging us out of the EU. I wanted to say that some time ago.
Well, that's very sweet of you. We're not quite out yet, but I hope we're on our way.
I mean, I totally agree with you on everything you've said about the NHS. And that gentleman who was having his little go against the Conservative government, as a fairly good Conservative myself and a councillor, I believe that this government is the first one that has suggested asking immigrants to pay for their treatment.
Yes.
I don't think it's ever happened before. I've had experience myself. I was working in America 50 years ago, and a lady and I were jumping off the balcony of my ex-wife's flat. Don't ask why. We were both. I was tiddling and she wasn't. And I said, "Darling, you be careful, you know." And she said, "Well, look, I can't get abortion in this country, so if I can't get rid of it this way, I'm going to go over to the UK and get it there." And that's been 50 years.
Yes.
I came back a few years later, and I was in the Royal Eye Hospital. I don't know how many people there were from overseas then, but it was a good few of them. But we must stop this because the NHS is staggering. And if we don't do something about it now, I feel the NHS is going to fail. And as for this business about privatisation...
It's nonsense. It's nonsense. No, Robbie, it's not. But let me tell you what a bigger worry is. I did my bit to try and raise this issue of health tourism, and the Mail newspaper have done a fair bit on it.
I know that, and I think you should be congratulated for that.
And it was a tough thing to do. Your political party called me all the names under the sun. I was a
well, I apologise on behalf of
I was a barbarian and all the rest of it. But what I've noticed, Robbie, with Mrs May, whether it's as Home Secretary, whether it's as Prime Minister dealing with Brexit, whether it's one of her spokesmen talking about health, yes, I am pleased that at last we have a government talking about this issue. In fact, she even took the line. It's the National Health Service, not the International Health Service. The trouble is, Robbie, will they actually deliver?
Well, let's hope, Nigel. Let's hope. And just as a matter of interest, I was also at a very good school rather near yours, and I know your father, so you better be careful if we're talking.
Goodness me. Right, Robbie, thank you. Well, a very great call. Well, so far this morning, someone knows my mum, someone knows my dad. I mean, it's not supposed to be a family show as such, but it appears to be this morning. Quite what Robbie was doing, jumping off a balcony, I've absolutely no idea. And that wasn't a recommendation for anyone else to do it, please. Jeff is calling from Munich. Hi, Jeff. Good morning.
Yeah, hi, Nigel. I'm not jumping off a balcony, and for Klaus to find in Munich, trusted enemy again.
No, it's nice to hear from you again. So, So what happens, Jeff? I mean, if I'm in Germany and I come from, I don't know, I might come from America for argument's sake, how tough would the Germans be on getting my credit card details or insurance policy before they treat me?
If you're not insured, you don't get sorted.
Simple,
There's a certain level of clearance. But what I'd like to tell you is the story that I had in Britain, if I can.
Go on.
You know, I'm an expatriate, a British expatriate, and I'm fully medically insured in Germany.
Uh-huh.
So I used to visit my old mum at Christmas time, and I got bitten by a cat.
Right.
And your listeners will laugh at that.
We're trying not to laugh, Jeff, but go on.
Yeah. So I had blood poisoning, tracking up and down the arms, and off to accident and emergency, 2 nights in hospital, excellent service, wonderful from the NHS. Thank you very much, for what they did, for me. It was absolutely brilliant. So then I go to the front desk, after they've released me, and I say, hey, I'm fully insured in Germany, technically a Krankenkasse, I'd like to pay, or I'd like to fill in the forms. No. You're a British citizen, you have a national insurance number, no problem. Yeah, but I don't pay into the system in Britain. I live in Germany. They will pay, And I would imagine that 2 nights in hospital would cost at least, 2,000.
Yeah, it's a couple of grand, isn't it? Yeah.
And I wanted to, but she said, no. That was an emergency, and we treat all emergencies free in Britain. You should know that. You're British. And I don't understand why they threw away the 2,500 that the German...
Yeah, you see, Jeff, you've made this point. We had another caller talk about an American GI coming out of Bromley Hospital offering to pay and being told there's no need. Others who've sent in SMS messages making the same point. You try to pay and they don't want the money. So is it really... is this the culture of the NHS, Jeff, that needs rethinking?
Well, I'm wondering if there isn't a system, if there's a system set up, for expatriates or, foreign people or even British citizens who haven't paid in to pay, if there's the system and if they know about it.
Your situation is a little bit unique, but in general terms, we seem to be very good at providing free care from people from all over the world and not terribly good at reconciling any of it. Jeff, I thank you for your call and the story. And we didn't laugh, did we, when he said he was bitten by a cat? Because, hey, that could be really, really nasty. This issue, and Robbie, the Conservative councillor from Edenbridge, made the point that this is now very much on the government's radar. They're talking about it. Let's see whether they deliver. I still don't think we're quite strong enough and tough enough to do it. I hope I'm wrong. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show, Sunday edition. I'm back tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. At 3 this afternoon, it's Andrew Castle. But up next, it's Majid Nawaz.
Thank you, Nigel.